Good evening, everybody. Before we dive into this topic and talk about such very complex terms that you can see on this slide, which is about interspecies justice and about disasters and how animal rights come into it, I want to start with something very simple. And I want all of you to ask a question to yourself. When you try to imagine the strongest person that you know, who is the one person you often think of? Mostly, it's actually our parents. It's our moms or our dads who will do everything for us if we are in any kind of problem or danger. They will make sure that our concerns are met. They'll make sure that we are happy. They make sure that we have food on our table. They make sure that we are fine. And when we are suffering, they too suffer with us. This story and this point actually is something that's also true about animals. And I actually want to share a story that an experience that I had today actually. And this is actually about two dogs that live just right next to my house. And they basically gave birth to that dog basically and her kids. And today, while I was feeding those dogs, there was some kind of casual infighting happening between those dogs, and I was trying to separate them. And the moment I put my hand down, the mom came at me with everything she's got. She got into mom mode, just like our moms do for our children. She thought that I was going to do something wrong. And that's something, a maternal instinct, that's always going to be there. And so animals, just like humans, just like our parents, have these family bonds. They feel the love, the passion, and they can enjoy all the emotions of the world. They are sentient, just like us. And because of that, they deserve rights. They deserve to be happy and to basically not be poisoned. And this is a reality that we see in Pakistan across the country. We see dogs getting poisoned for no reason. And why is that? And that's actually because the way we think is actually we assume that these animals actually cannot suffer. They're just lifeless beings, and you can do anything with them. And this perspective, this human-driven perspective, is something that is affecting the way we look at the environment, the way we look at animals. And a quotation, basically, from a philosopher in the 1800s, he said, and this summarizes this beautifully, even though animals, they cannot speak the same language, they do speak, and they're actually not voiceless. But it's actually that they have the capacity to suffer, as I mentioned. They have the capacity to love. But that is often ignored. And what we really do is, we only think from our perspective, which is actually termed as the anthropocentric perspective, and the current era that we live in is referred to as the Anthropocene era, where everything is human-driven. And what you see here, this is actually home. This is Pakistan. This is a picture just from 2 years ago. And where Pakistan faced the most devastating floods in its history. So many people are affected. But ignore the impacts on the environment and the impacts on the animals. We as humans also suffer because those factors basically cause this disaster. And from a very anthropocentric point of view, from a very human-driven point of view, what we often see is only humans as victims of disasters. But also, animals are also victims of the disasters as well. And that is something that we need to change. And that is actually how we think. But to go away from this anthropocentric point of view, we have to adopt new approaches. And that's the idea I want to share with you today, which is interspecies justice. But I want to ask basically two questions to all of you, and this is from a human-driven perspective. And basically I want to pull out that the answer to these questions basically decide if we live as a human race or not. This decides the future of our planet, and this decides whether we actually exist or not. This is a very big question. And the first question that we have today, that everybody's asking, how are we going to feed the 10 billion human population that is expected by 2050? How are we going to make sure that the way we create our food doesn't cause natural disasters, doesn't cause climate change, and therefore ensures us human survival? These questions are from a human point of view. And this is something that we'll answer today. The answer, or the idea that I basically want to share with you, is interspecies justice. What is interspecies justice? It's a basic idea where we look at that the human well-being is connected with a livable planet. You need an ecosystem, you need a home. And how can you survive if you do not take care of the home that you live in? And you have the same ideas about the animals as well, because they too suffer. And when you actually poison those dogs, the story that I shared before, what really happens is that poison is eaten by other animals, and it eventually ends up in our food chain. It kills us. That's a human point of view. But we tend to ignore that, because that's how we normally think. And the way our food is made, I'm just going to give one very simple example. Normally, to basically grow our chickens, we feed them hormones and growth-stimulating factors. What that does is that the chicken, which was supposed to grow up to an adult age in 7 months, only grows up to its full age in just 31 days. Its bones are broken. It feels all those pains. And that's exploitation. And that's actually part of the way the food system works. And the food system actually relies on putting all these animals in a single confined space. But that basically creates a lot of environmental harm. And we tend to ignore that. And the only way to come away with that is adopting an interspecies justice approach. This approach moves beyond connections. This approach acknowledges that animals, humans, and the environment are connected, but they all have rights, which cannot be balanced at all. And to show you what interspecies justice really means, and this can apply to everything that we do. In this water project, which is actually made in Sindh and a work that we do, you see in this picture is that there's an animal drinking from the same water project. There's a human drinking from that same water project as well. What you may not see is that this is a manual operated water project. So the carbon footprint of our work is also zero. And we make sure that humans, animals, and environment comes together. And we never tell the people to bring their animals with themselves because we want them to internalize this idea. We don't want to impose anything on them. That's a justice approach. And we have over 1,500 of these water projects across Pakistan. That's interspecies justice, and the impact is in the millions. Another justice approach, and the reason why I'm talking about disasters, is that when the disasters happened, we went into the flood zones to rescue both humans and animals. That was an interspecies justice approach. For the humans, we set up medical camps to tackle period poverty, and we built them houses, provided them food. And for the children, we actually built a school, which was plant-based school, because we wanted them to enjoy and make sure that their carbon footprint of the way they learn is also actually as minimal as possible, but also providing them education. Then we also rescued animals, something that's never done, especially farm animals. We went to the flood zones, provided them emergency aid, and rescued over 8,000 farm animals. And eventually, we decided to build Pakistan's first disaster zone farm animal shelter, because these animals, just like humans, deserve protection. And to bring the idea really home, I actually want to talk about Pakistan, the disaster that happened, and to put it into context. 33 million people affected. We faced an economic loss of $30 billion. Over 1,700 human beings died. Over 12,000 people were injured. And over governance disaster protection. We have only data available for livestock animals because we assigned them a human property value. And all the other animals, the wildlife that died, we didn't even have a policy to have data for them. And therefore, this law also has zero protections for animals at all in the case of disasters. But the point that I basically want to drive home is that what really caused the floods, and were they really predictable? There was a research done in 2022 at the Imperial College London, and they said that based on the climate projections, we could actually predict that this disaster was going to happen. And while they could not put a precise figure, like a precise figure on the exact global warming harm, they did say that the impact is definitely there. And because of the global warming, we face those disasters. And therefore, Anthropocentrism, which is a human-driven perspective, is something that is incompatible with interspecies justice, and is the approach that we need to solve all of our problems. So now, when we talk about the food system, what we often understand is that we're just putting in food products in, animals in, confining them in a single space, and then we get some food to basically meet the food population. And to feed the people, which is basically the food system. And the questions that we're asking the food system are also really hard. We're asking it to make sure that malnutrition doesn't happen. We are asking to make sure there's no climate change effect, there's no animal cruelty, and at the same time we can feed all of our people. These are too many questions to ask, while we're not acknowledging how complex the food system is. And just to highlight one of those problems, and this is a research that was done by the United Nations Environmental Program. They said that for 100 calories of food crops that are grown to basically feed the animals, and then those animals are fed to us, in return, we only get 17% of those calories. If we fix this problem, we can actually solve food security on its own. But we have to acknowledge to make sure that we remove the animals from the food system so that they don't suffer any harm. But the food system, actually, the way it works right now, from an anthropocentric perspective, is actually responsible for 26% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. That is why the temperatures rose up. That is why we had the floods. And the way our food actually is made decided whether we were going to suffer from that flood. And it also made sure all the casualties that happened. So this responsibility actually is on us. And there are other factors that are important as well. For example, 50% of the world's land is just used to make the food that we eat. That's a lot of land. And we could use it for other reasons. A high amount of manure. And this picture is actually from California in the US. This is where this food system originally started, where a lot of animals were confined in very confined spaces where they could not even move. They were suffering the most highest amount of cruelty. But as a result, they were also producing a very high amount in the millions of gallons of manure. This is an open air pit. And what you can see is that all of this manure is producing air pollution. And it's also going to go into the food table. And the water is going to be drunk by people. And what you also are seeing is that these kind of food systems are not something that you'll see in urban centers, because people like us, privileged people, would never agree. Therefore, these systems are actually brought up in places where poor people are living, which causes environmental racism, because we are objecting poor people just for no reason to an insane amount of environmental harm and lots of diseases that run throughout their life. And just to bring the point home, truly, how much time do we have and how important this situation is? Normally, what we think about when we think about environmental harm is that let's just stop with the fossil fuels and that will solve the problem. But the IPCC, which is the official United Nations body for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, to which Pakistan is also a party, said this last year at their COP, that if we eliminate fossil fuels today, just because of that 26%, the 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions, the way they come from our food system, we will never reach that 1.5-degree goals that we have put in the Paris Agreement to make sure that global temperatures don't rise and then we don't face more floods. And Pakistan is also party to this. This is a very important factor. And the last thing that I actually want to mention is how much time do we have to fix this problem if we want to? We only have 6 years. And this comes from the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Office, which is the main official body of the world to direct disaster management. And they too are anthropocentric, which is human-driven, because their laws have zero protections for animals in any way. And our laws in Pakistan also have zero protections, which is completely human-driven. And as a result, by confining those animals in our food system, we're causing an insane amount of environmental harm that is causing these disasters. This is a very important more, because we will never have the resources to take action. And so the only way we can cover from these disasters is that we prevent them from happening in the first place. So we have to reevaluate our food system. We have to remove the animals out of it to make sure the environmental harm is also reduced as much as possible. And if we do not fix this problem, another 37.6 million people will suffer extreme poverty. This is something that will affect Pakistan the most because of our economic situation. And that's, again, a very huge responsibility. So in summary, the way our human-driven food system works, it causes disasters. It caused the 2022 disaster in Pakistan. So much was lost. And it causes to conclude with and come home to is actually intergenerational inequity. Because the reason we change or move towards these food systems is actually to solve the problem of food security. And food insecurity problems only happen after disasters. And so therefore we go to that same food system which causes more disasters. And then because of those more disasters, we go again back to the food system. And we're caught up in that continuous cycle. We never come out. And Pakistan is also actually caught up in it. Actually, the whole world is. But it will affect us the most because of our precarious economic situation and the way the children are living here, suffering malnutrition and so many other issues, as mentioned before. So the main thing that I actually want to leave you with is this idea of interspecies justice. It's an idea that all of us are sentient. Therefore, all of us deserve protections. And that has a huge impact, because if we do not take care of our home, we are not going to have a possibility of human life possible, and animal life as well. So I'll end this with one quote. We only have one life to make a difference. Do it today. They only have one life to feel the difference. Do it today. And embrace an interspecies justice approach where we respect the animals and the environment and give them the respect they deserve. Because without them, we may not exist, but they will definitely exist without us. And that's a huge responsibility to have. Thank you so much.